Hello, Bill.
Good morning, Matt.
Welcome to the DMZ, everybody.
This is the second take. We did a show yesterday that got botched. We haven't had that in a while. We've had a pretty good run not screwing up our own shows.
Well, I think the technology's gotten better, Bill. People forget, well, when you and I first started doing this, literally we would be talking on a telephone held up to our ear.
Yeah.
That's how you and I could hear each other. And then we were recording on QuickTime. I would record my video on my computer. You would record your video on your computer. The magic of the blogging heads was that somehow before Zoom, before Zencastr, before Riverside, they could somehow put these videos together.
Right.
And that was, I think, at the time, very cutting edge. But back then, we had a lot more technological difficulties. Now it is rare that we have to do what we had to do this week.
You know, I saw an upsetting exchange on X. I think it was two DC journalists, like Gen Z or millennial DC journalists, who were like, just learned what dial-up means. and then someone saying, an older colleague told me sometimes you'd call and get a busy signal, and that's how you knew they were on the internet at that moment. And like, that can't be true.
I hate them so much, but that's neither here nor there, Bill. You and I get to talk twice this week.
Yes.
And that is always a good thing. And so here we are. It's a little bit later in the week, but we have stuff to talk about. And I want to start, Bill. You had a piece this week in Washington Monthly where it's not just Donald Trump's recent history of convictions and civil liability and indictments, but this is really he's strung together 5 decades or so of
you can go back to 1973.
Activity.
Yeah, you can go back to 1973 when the Justice Department sued him and his father and his company for racial discrimination in housing. This is one of the first Fair Housing Act cases, and like literally, black applicants, the building managers being told like, don't put the application in the drawer and forget about it, like that blatant. And Trump fought it for a couple of years. Also unusual. There was another case around that time when they didn't fight it and just accepted a settlement. They fought it, then accepted a settlement, with no admission of wrongdoing, but with provisions of how to change behavior. And then 3 years later, the Justice Department said, you're not living up to your agreements here. And then 4 years, then they ran out the clock on it and never actually owned up to anything. But it's not just that there's been like patterns of, skirting the law for decades. There's also rank hypocrisy and how Trump talks about crime and talks about law and order. His infamous 1989 print ad where you bring back the death penalty, bring back our cops in the wake of the Central Park jogger brutal rape, which obviously shocked the conscience at the time, understandably so. But those who were indicted were literally 14 to 16 years old. You don't normally call for the death penalty for teenagers. And as it turns out, none of them actually did it. They all were exonerated. But in that, he's talking about the ultimate punishment for rape explicitly. What does he do 6 years later? He rapes E. Jean Carroll. And I know that under the technical definitions of New York state law, it was classified as a sexual assault and not rape. And to be blunt here, it's because under New York state law, rape applies when you use your penis, and sexual assault applies when you use your finger. And the judge in the case said explicitly, this is why, because Trump was trying to accuse Carroll of defamation for calling him a rapist. And the judge was like, no, this is what rape is considered in common parlance. It's just not technically a legal definition under New York state law. And apologies for going on and on here, but So in 2000, he writes in one of his books, complains about forgiving judges letting criminals out. As president, he not only pardons 200 plus people, which all presidents use their pardon power, but he circumvents the Justice Department's vetting department to ensure that you're pardoning people who deserve it. He ignores them most of the time and instead pardons his friends and political allies. And ABC News reported a couple years ago that based on what data they could collect, they are recommitting crimes at a higher rate than past presidents. Surprise, surprise. And finally, as president, he said we should execute drug dealers. They should be executed. 3 months after that, he commutes the sentence for a drug dealer, Alice Johnson, which was a sympathetic case because she was an African-American grandmother, already served 21 years on a life sentence. But she was a drug dealer. She was involved in a multi-million-dollar cocaine trafficking enterprise. And he did it because he was lobbied by Kanye West and Kim Kardashian, and he wanted to hold her up at the convention as evidence that Black people should vote for her. And she endorsed him at the convention, then he pardoned her after the endorsement. And just last month, he goes to the Libertarian Convention and says, I'll pardon Russ Ulbricht, who is serving a life sentence for coordinating 1 million drug deals off of his Silk Road website. Again, and you could argue, well, he shouldn't have a life sentence. Okay, Donald Trump said he should be executed. And he's not freeing anyone else who's a drug dealer. He's freeing the drug dealers who he thinks can help him politically. He does not believe the law applies to him if it involves his money. He's been busted for criminal tax fraud, or his business has. And it involves him making money or him gaining political power. Law does not apply to him. I mean, you cannot get more hypocritical than that.
I think you're exactly right. And I would also add, all this talk about this is Trump's first offense when it has to do with this, the guilty verdict in the New York hush money case. Well, the sentencing's coming up on June 11th, but the judge may not give him jail time because this is his first offense. Well, technically, I guess it is. But as you have illustrated in this piece, Bill, he's got a 50-year track record of skirting the law, not to mention the hypocrisy that you've just laid out.
I mean, if I was a conservative, I'd be mad. You're a law and order conservative? Why would you want that to be your standard bearer?
But I think we've learned that there are very few law and order conservatives who actually care about the rule of law and principle. And there are many more conservatives or Trump MAGA Republicans, we won't even call them conservatives, who believe that the definition of illegal is somebody that Trump doesn't like. So it is now about power. It is about tribalism. It is not good. But in principle and philosophy, be damned.
Well, look, if the judge says, or even the prosecution, the DA has to make a sentencing recommendation, and I think it was a Politico story today that's a bit of a political dance for him. How hard does he go in the recommendation? If he gets a light sentence, I'm fine with that. I don't think he has to have prison time for falsification of business records, and for technically speaking, a first-time offense. But I do think the broader story is important politically, because the pushback that Trump and his allies are making is that he's been sort of, they politically went after him on this ticky-tack thing. Either it shouldn't be considered a crime at all, or best a misdemeanor, and they stretched the law to make it a felony, and it's all bogus. And Trump himself compares himself to Al Capone, who got caught for tax evasion. And of course, that is the apt comparison. Al Capone was a much bigger criminal. That's what they got him on.
Yes.
You don't have to believe that that the hush money thing is the worst crime in the universe to look at all the other facts that are out there about this person's life and recognize this is a man of low character who does not believe the law should apply to him. I mean, here's the basic facts of the hush money case is he cheated on his pregnant wife. He was using the National Enquirer to smear his rivals under the table in violation, or at least skirting, campaign finance laws. And this became an extension of that relationship. This is not what decent people do. It's not what every politician does. So we can conclude this is not a good human being who does not look out for other people when he pursues his endeavors, regardless of how severe you think this particular crime is.
Yeah. And Bill, a couple of related stories to this I should just mention. One is that apparently Steve Bannon is going to go to jail, I think for ignoring a congressional subpoena. Is that right?
Yeah.
And so this was the top advisor to President Trump, yet another of the Trump associates who is going to do jail time.
I haven't done the tally on it. Like, what's the tally of Trump administration officials who have done jail time compared to every other president?
It is a lot.
Someone must have done the numbers. I haven't.
As a young conservative, I remember Rush Limbaugh, and I cannot track this down anywhere. I can't find it, but Rush Limbaugh, as I recall, many times during the Clinton era, would talk about all of their associates who had been, arrested, indicted, whatever, and said, like, how many people do you know who've had these sort of problems? And I would say the same thing about Donald Trump now. Like, how many of your close friends have been like arrested or indicted for all of these various things? And some of them were already, pardoned by Donald Trump and let out. And by the way, he wants to pardon the J6 rioters as well. So, yeah. Is the other side has troubles too. Mm-hmm. And I did want to mention Joe Biden, Bill, has come out and said that he would not pardon Hunter Biden if he's convicted in this gun charge, which I think is a pretty bold, tough stand, because I have to tell you, if Hunter Biden is a very troubled history, he appears to be guilty of doing a lot of bad things, but if one of my sons were about to go to jail he could go to jail for 25 years, Bill. Mm-hmm. I would be very tempted to grant them leniency. What do you make of that?
Obviously, it's a horrible position to be put in, but it's the only it's the only proper answer to give politically and substantively. He can't give favors to his son. It's unlikely he would get that stiff a sentence for a charge like this, and considering all the circumstances surrounding it. It's not like he, illegally obtained a weapon and then used it in some horrible way. And the evidence of his, spiraling drug addiction is very plain. But this has to be emotionally punishing to have all of this aired out publicly. I mean, it's clear, like, what a disastrous situation he was in, that Beau's widow was in, things that are involved that have impacts, obviously, on Joe Biden's grandchildren. It's just horrible, and which is also why I don't think this poses a political problem for Joe Biden. I think this is probably engendering more sympathy than anything else. You can't argue that the justice system is favoring Democrats or Biden family members because he's going through this. And the case in itself is not a case of someone doing something all that selfish. It was someone who was suffering from an illness. So it's just everything about the case is wholly different than the Trump case.
All right, well, let's turn to politics, Bill. And earlier this week, the Wall Street Journal had a pretty controversial piece where they interviewed a lot of sources, including apparently former Speaker Kevin McCarthy, saying that behind the scenes, Joe Biden is not good, has certainly lost a step. We also have some polling. I don't know if you saw this. There was a poll of Virginia that showed Donald Trump tied with Joe Biden. I mean, if Biden has to worry about defending Virginia, that is very rough. What do you make of these latest developments? I should say, Biden appeared to be great in Normandy during the D-Day 80th anniversary.
Well, that's the thing. Like, what debunks these things is his performance. You know, if he has a terrible performance, then that's a whole nother story. But you know, I remember, I think it was 2022. He did an appearance on Jimmy Kimmel that I thought was really bad. That was really more disjointed than usual, and I was like, yeah, I don't know. But that's not been replicated, and I look back on it. I don't think it was a sign of, you know, cognitive decline. I just think he's sort of awkward in that format, and he kind of came with lots of canned answers and wasn't really having a normal give and take, and so it just came across kind of weird. I was like, he's always done weird stuff. Like he's made weird comments and things that seem off kilter for a very long time. You know, what's different is he walks more stiffly. He often speaks in a soft, kind of mumbling tone. The stutter has come back some. You know, that's what's different. So he feels older. But I've never seen a situation where, I mean, the worst thing you can say is he mixes up names sometimes. You know, but even when he does that, you can see from the broader context of the answers he's giving that he understands the issue that he's talking about. He's not like he doesn't know up from down. I mean, you just, there's a Time Magazine interview that the transcript is available of where you can see he's talking about things in great detail. It is not like a bunch of talk. They talk about these means sometimes he's reading off of cards. And you look at the way the answers are, like it's a lot more extemporaneous to how he's talking. There's no way he's reading off the cue cards that's happening. I'm sure there are times when a president has to read off of notes because you want to be absolutely sure you're saying things exactly the way they should be said, so you don't cause a gap of some sort. You know, Biden has a tendency to kind of to go off script, so there might be times where you're like, well, let's make sure this guy doesn't go off script today. But the other stuff in the article where, you know, it took a long time to get around the room and like greet everybody. We know from his physicals that he has significant arthritis, like even like spinal arthritis, and he has a very stiff gait. If people can't hear what he's saying, like, and it's not the same as like not knowing what's going on. You know, old is old. You know, I mean, he's old. There's no getting around that fact. But I didn't see anything in the article that really said to me like you got the goods on cognitive decline here. And the ultimate test is how he performs in public. And we got literally a debate in 3 weeks where that's going to be fully adjudicated.
That is all. That is what it's about. And I just interviewed Mike Murphy, the famed Republican strategist. You know, he worked for Mitt Romney, John McCain, Arnold Schwarzenegger. And Mike Murphy told me that having this debate in July was very smart. It's early. You know, again, these debates usually happen in September, October. But that this was smart. Biden needs to change the tone. He needs to change the trajectory of the race. This could do it. But Mike Murphy said if it doesn't go well, Biden should consider stepping aside. So that has not left. That notion that Democrats should have a talk with Biden and convince him to get out if things don't go well. I guess the theory would be that there'd be enough time after that first debate to pull the plug. What do you make of that, Bill?
Well, I mean, when we say not go well, are we talking about something along the lines of, you know, the usual slip up that any politician could have? Like plenty of politicians mix up a name here or there. You say Iran when you mean Iraq, or even Russia when you mean China, when like both things are kind of in your head because you're talking about all sorts of issues. Like lots of politicians do that sort of thing. And Trump does it plenty himself. So like something like that, I don't think means he has to drop out. Like it'd have to be, I think, decidedly worse that would clearly indicate genuine decline that would force that kind of issue, in my opinion. But it is a high stakes, you know, unscripted event. I do wonder a little bit if it is a bit of a mistake to let this be a CNN event. Not that CNN in particular, but that it's a one network event. I don't know. I don't believe every network is going to run it. If CNN's going to let that happen. the one value of it being with the debate commission is that it was sort of a free feed and all that everyone could take it. So is that gonna limit your audience? Is that gonna make this less of a, the nation stops to watch kind of event? I don't know.
Yeah.
But I do think it should be a big event one way or another. But I wonder if that limits it in some way.
Well, we should talk quickly about the polls, Bill, because they're tight. Like I said, though, in some states like Virginia, if you buy the polling, not a good sign for Joe Biden. But I know you've been focused on some of these third-party candidates and how they may be impacting the numbers and possibly distorting based on the fact that some of them may not actually make it on the ballots, but they are making it into these polls, and that they could be distorting the actual horse race. What would say you?
Well, just to start with the Virginia poll. Well, a couple of about that. One, Biden was behind by 4 in Florida, which actually is pretty good for Florida. So it's sort of a weird, and I've seen worse polls for Biden in Florida. So it's sort of weird that like Virginia was iffy and Florida was on the outer edge of being competitive. But I think the Virginia poll, like other soft Biden polls, was him being bogged down by softness in what would be otherwise base categories, youth, African-American votes. And we saw in the New York Times poll he just did, which was a bit of an unusual poll. I don't think it's one that's getting included in the averages, because I don't think it's a classic national poll or state-by-state poll. But they recanvassed people who had been part of polls in the prior month and found a 2-point shift towards Biden. And anecdotally, the people that they highlighted were people who generally were Biden voters in 2020, were kind of souring on him, but the felony conviction was bringing them back. So this is really, I think, the big unknown in a lot of these polls where Biden is doing worse than before. These people going to come back a few months from now?
Let me just quickly put a pin in this, because I do need to take my victory lap, and I apologize for interrupting you, Bill. But
sure.
Over the last couple of years, I think you have performed better at making predictions than me, which had been a change. But I have to say, I think I had the conviction.
Yeah.
I think you thought that there would be a hung jury. I had the conviction.
I was expecting a hung jury.
So I was right about that. And
yes.
I also have said, at least maybe not here, but many places, that I anticipate a conviction will, on the margins, help Biden and hurt Trump. It seems like that is shaking out. Correct.
Yeah, I mean, you can't say it completely definitively, because you get a Virginia result that doesn't indicate that. So it's not like it's all moving in one direction, but we have seen some polls move 1-2 points in Biden's direction. And how it fully shakes out requires I think several weeks to see how the information gets fully absorbed. But get back to where you started this conversation and what I wrote about for the Washington Monthly newsletter yesterday. One way we are trying to gauge how base weakness is playing out is by looking at the multi-candidate polls. What happens when you add in Robert Kennedy and Cornel West and Jill Stein? We have some indication. Well, in the Real Clear Politics average, at least when I checked it yesterday, and I didn't recheck this morning if something fresh came in. I don't think anything fresh came in. Biden was at Trump had a 1-point lead in the Real Clear Politics two-way average, and a 2.1 lead. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm correcting myself. He actually was down to a 0.5 lead in the two-way average, and a 2.1 lead in the five-way average. So I guess having the real races with all these other candidates on the ballot. So I guess they are actually hurting Biden more than Trump. And what is kind of mind-boggling to me is, and I've said in the past that I don't think Kennedy should be on the ballot until he's proven to be on more state ballots. As it stands, he appears to be certified only on I think it's 6 right now. Kenny claims to have more because I have the signatures, or he's gotten a line on some other minor party's ballot that's in just that one state. But that doesn't necessarily mean he's been certified yet. So there's still some uncertainty there. So I still think he's got more to prove to my eyes. But for this discussion, let's just assume he's going to be on more. He's got the money. He's got good poll numbers. He's going to get to over 40. Come the fall. Let's just for the sake of our, let's assume that. Okay. And Jill Stein, Green Party. I think they're at 21 right now, if I remember correctly. And they have a track record of getting over 40 sometimes. They did in 2020, they did in 2012 and 2016. So there's some track record there. She's complained that Kennedy has bought up all the good professional signature gatherers, so she might be having a harder time. But I can understand giving her the benefit of the doubt, keep her in the polls. Cornel West is on somewhere between 4 to 8 state ballots right now, depending on whether that's the campaign or some of these other operations that are tracking his progress. He has $19,000 cash on hand. And
I have more money than Cornel West. Come on.
And $28,000 in debts. Okay. Cornel West is not going to be on 40 state ballots, let alone 50. He should not be in national polls, period. And who am I missing in this list? The Libertarians. There is almost no poll that exists this year with any Libertarian candidate mentioned. Well, they only had their convention 2 weeks ago. Well, the Greens haven't had it at all yet. And Jill Stein is being mentioned. So there are a couple polls that had a stand-in candidate, Lars Mapstead, who ended up not being the nominee. We now have Chase Oliver. I've seen one poll where Chase Oliver's mentioned. I grant you he got 0% in that poll. So I'm not saying, but this is also sort of a chicken and egg deal. Like, he's not on the polls, so he doesn't get the media coverage. You don't know he exists. So at some point, maybe people will know he exists. I mean, how many state ballots are the Libertarians on right now? They're starting at 37. There are more state ballots than any of these people that I have mentioned, and they're not getting put in the polls, which is just ludicrous to me. And so what would we see if we had polling that had Kennedy, Stein, and Oliver with some period of time when Oliver's getting some coverage, roughly equivalent to what Kennedy and Stein have been getting? Where would things shake out then? So right now, again, I had a 1.6 point difference between the 5-way and the 2-way. Stein and West combined for 3.3. West himself was 1.7. West himself accounts for the entirety of the gap when he's not even going to be on the ballot in most places. So it seems to me, just, this is a little bit back of the envelope, and this is obviously, margin of error type stuff here, but Kennedy himself appears to be taking more to Trump than Biden. It's Stein and West that offset that and make it so it's a net loss for Biden. And if you had a Libertarian in the mix, maybe it's a total wash. So we just don't even know. We don't have the data at all what the actual effect of these minor party candidates are right now. And this is even taking into account the fact that minor party candidates tend to fade, when you get closer to election day.
All right. It's confusing and close. Let's end with this, Bill. Joe Biden this week has issued an executive order at the border. This is basically, it affects asylum claims. People who show up at the border claiming asylum. Correct me if I'm wrong. I think the deal is if 2,500 people, once you hit that number, who show up, the border shuts down. Which we've already hit. And it happens, does it shut down for until there's less or fewer? Yeah, that's until they get, I think they get back down to 1,500 before you could lift it. So this is essentially a Trump era policy that Biden reversed on his first day in office. It was part of the deal. This is part of what Biden wanted. Can I stop you there, Matt? I would not characterize it as Trump era policy. You might say it's Trump-like in certain ways, but it's not. Okay. It's not a cut and paste job. Okay. You can fact check me on that in 1 second. Let me just set it up. this is also part of the deal that Biden was trying to cobble together with Republicans, and Donald Trump put the kibosh on that, right?
Yes. Yes.
But part of the problem is we've seen whether it's DACA or student loans, we have seen presidents say they can't do something without congressional approval. Then they can't get congressional approval. They do it unilaterally. And then sometimes the courts, or frequently the courts, will reverse it and say, no, you do not have the authority to do that. So anyway, that's a whole bunch of stuff I'll throw at you. But what do you make of this?
Well, before I just wrote about this at the Washington Monthly, so I'm happy to talk about it in detail. But I just want to ask you your gut reaction as a conservative, and you've actually been, a Reaganite pro-immigration conservative, but you were never fully open borders. What was your gut reaction? You're like, this is not going to work. This is political grandstanding. Biden caused this problem himself by being lax, and now he's trying to make up for it. Did you have that kind of cynical reaction to it, or did you take it more as he's doing his level best to try to fix a tough problem?
I mean, I have a nuanced take, right? So first of all, in a perfect world, I don't think, the way it really should work is we should have, you should be able to show up at America and claim asylum. And we should be able to very quickly litigate or ascertain whether you actually have that status or not. Okay. I do believe that any country who cannot or does not control its borders is not really a country. I also believe we should have a lot of immigrants, and we should be a beacon of hope and welcoming immigrants. So there's a lot of nuance going on there in terms of my personal viewpoint. Look, I think very clearly Joe Biden is doing this for political reasons, and I'm totally okay with that. Part of the reason that we have this great system that pits ambition against ambition is that people ultimately do the right thing a lot of times because there's political pressure on them to do it. So great. I think this is we will see. We will see whether a president has the authority. I know that they have, when it comes to immigration, they have some broad authority. Can they do this? Can Biden get away with doing this unilaterally? We shall find out. But the policy itself, I think, probably is pretty good policy and very good politics.
You think it's very good politics? You don't think he's going to get hit? Is by making immigration an issue, giving your opponent, playing on your opponent's turf?
Look, ignoring immigration is not going to make it go away. You can't change the subject. You can't downplay this issue. The question is, are you going to address it and do something about it or not? So I don't think that by doing something about this, Biden is somehow handing Republicans a win by elevating the issue. It is an issue. It's already like the number one or number two issue, according to voters when they're surveyed. Biden should have done this a long time ago, but better late than never.
So, so just to get into the specifics of it, again,
and by the way, Biden is smart to keep reminding people that Republicans had a deal to do this legislatively, and Donald Trump forced them to walk away from fixing this, or at least helping mitigate the problem. You should blame Trump for this. And I think it'll help in the debate. It comes back to the debate, right? That's what we were just saying like 15 minutes ago, that if the debate goes well, that's, all systems go.
Well, and also part of the challenge here is how well does this policy go? It's not, it's one thing to say, it's nothing to do it. And he is squeezed on both sides of this issue. You got Republicans saying it's too little too late, and you got people on the left saying this is draconian and reminiscent of Trump and violates your pledges before. So there's no perfect solution here. The main problem is that Biden, like most Democrats, wants America to be a welcoming country, as Matt Lewis and Ronald Reagan do. But when you have this massive influx of asylum seekers on the border coming in unannounced, I mean, there is a legal right to asylum under the law and under international treaties, which is, if you are physically in America and you're under threat of persecution, then you have a right to asylum. And the problem is you have to adjudicate whether you meet the criteria, and there's such a massive backlog and so few immigration judges that it takes years to adjudicate these people in most cases. And sometimes the immigration judges say, okay, you weren't, it's been a few years, you actually don't meet the criteria for asylum, but you can stay anyway. So there's a way to kind of hack the system. And I would argue as a long run matter, fine. They are good for the economy. They expand the workforce, they expand the tax base, they expand economic growth. Many economists said they're the reason why the economy has been growing. They're the reason why inflation has been cooling. We've had a much more. I mean, maybe there are times when the job market is not tight, and you wouldn't want to have that many immigrants coming in. But that's not the situation right now. We have a very tight job market, and they're keeping it, fresh. So
I would also say, look, it's a happy dilemma when people want to come to America. That's a good sign.
Well,
that
it's a sign of how good the American economy is. If there was no American dream to pursue, no one would be coming to pursue it. There's a reason why people are coming here. It's because America is on the rise.
I agree with that. I would say, Bill, not to get into a huge debate about immigration, but the fact is that a lot of Americans are very upset about immigration. The polling bears this out.
Well, because there's a short-run
problem. Tells me that we got to do something because that helped radicalize America and give us Donald Trump.
But I think the Trump view is you can look at those polls narrowly and say, well, I guess America hates immigrants now. And so Trump is on good footing saying, I'm going to use the military to deport everybody. I'm going to root people out of their homes, people who have been here for years and years and years and are embedded in our communities. Millions of people, I'm going to use the military to uproot them and send them back out. I don't think that's what the poll numbers actually mean. Besides being wrong morally and economically, I think it's not what people actually want. What is the problem, and I think it is a problem, when you have this many, there has been a genuine major influx of people coming in since the pandemic because there's been so much upheaval in other countries, economically and politically, that more people from farther flung places have been pouring in through the border. And when they all come at once, it is a real strain on certain cities and states to find the shelter, to provide the schooling for children. I mean, most city budgets are not, slush funds. They're tight budgets. So there is a finite resource issue on the front end of migrants coming in that is difficult to manage. Doesn't mean that they are bad for the economy over the long haul, but you got this interim problem. How do you absorb them initially? And so Biden had been trying certain things. So you have to look at this in the context of everything Biden's been doing over the past 2 years, which is how do you fix a problem where we have legal pathways? We have student visas, we have work visas, we have refugees. When you're a refugee, it's a heavily vetted process before coming here. When you're a refugee, you have like a place to go. You're being sent to a place that has a refugee a charity typically, although actually Biden changed that, created a thing called Welcome Corps, where if you can get 4 of your friends together and scrape up some money and say, hey, we're going to be the support network for a refugee coming here. And that expands the places in the country where refugees can go. So this is the kind of stuff that Biden's been trying to do to fix the problem and to get rid of bottlenecks. Another thing that he's been done is called humanitarian parole, where you suspend immigration law for certain classes of people for 2 years. He's done this for Ukraine, Afghanistan, Nicaragua, Venezuela, Cuba, Haiti, where we've seen influxes of migration where we hadn't seen in the past. That's been sued on the right by Republican State Attorney General. A Trump-appointed judge said, at least for now, he's not going to overturn that executive order. So that's still on the books. Then you have the asylum part of it. And so asylum is the area where things get chaotic. People just show up. And one thing Biden's trying to do there is say, okay, we don't want people being trafficked. We don't want human smuggling. We don't want people trekking through the desert and dying. We don't want kids crossing the border unaccompanied. They're becoming roofers and being put into unsafe situations. So this is not good for anybody. Let's try to make this more orderly. We're going to have an app that you apply from outside of America to schedule an appointment. We're going to create processing centers in other countries so you don't come to the border to apply for asylum. That was not working well enough in the past few months, although the numbers have gone down since December. And so now Biden's saying, okay, we got to have a bigger shutdown so we can steer this population through these more orderly pathways. That's what he means by fixing the system, making it more manageable and not unruly. Doesn't mean less people get in for the time being. Yes, it does. And I can understand criticizing and saying people need help. They may not be technically persecuted by their religion or their gender or their political status, but they're desperate, need economic help. Well, that's not really what asylum's for. Asylum's not a job program. That's what work visas are for. But we do want to. I want to see people get the help that they need. I want to see America be a welcoming place. But if the cities can't manage the flow, and people are dying on illegal treks, that's not good either. So there's no perfect solution here. I think obviously politics are a part of this, but I think there's a substantive rationale for what he's doing. And even if it's unfortunate in the short run, to create some space for the cities to catch up and deal with what they have, for the immigration judges. I mean, Biden's increased the number of immigration judges, but the backlogs are still getting bigger. So there's trying to get through that backlog. That's a substantive reason to have a pause here. And if the pause actually works in that way, Biden's going to be able to make these points, in the fall. Because people will say, you know what, my committee's not being strained by this the way it was a year ago. He took the problem seriously where Donald Trump is not. So that's where I think there's political potential here to work in his favor.
All right. I think we're agreed. Probably a smart move politically. So we'll have
but not without risk. Not without risk.
Not without risk. Absolutely. We'll leave it there, Bill. Scher. I am out next week. So I guess barring some sort of emergency episode, we'll take the week off next week and be back in too. Bill, anything you want to plug?
So Washington Monthly newsletter, 2 editions this week, one about the polling, one about Trump's criminal history. I have my other Washington Monthly column about Biden's immigration plan. That's all at WashingtonMonthly.com.
I read my stuff at The Beast. I have a piece up on Hunter Biden and how the fact that Hunter Biden is on trial kind of disproves the notion that Joe Biden is the Svengali telling the Department of Justice what to do. I also have a piece up about how Donald Trump could very soon be in charge of the nuclear arsenal, but he cannot own a gun as a convicted felon. Just another weird irony of American life in the 21st century. And lastly, check out my podcast interview with Mike Murphy. You can watch it at youtube.com/Matt Lewis or listen to it at my podcast, Matt Lewis Can't Lose, on iTunes or wherever you listen. Bill Scher, always a pleasure.
Same here. Take care.
All right, we'll see you in a couple weeks.